The ballroom pulsed with light and laughter, but around him there was only ice. Damian Wolf sat at the head table, flanked by men in glittering tuxedos and women draped in jewels worth small fortunes. Waiters flitted with champagne, chandeliers cut rivers of gold across the marble floor. Yet despite the wealth, despite the spectacle, not a single soul near him dared speak unless he gave permission. He didn't smile. He never did. The reporters called him the Ice King. The kind of man who made billions with a nod, who destroyed rivals with a single flick of his pen. A man 35 years old with the empire of dynasties twice his age. In every article, one sentiment repeated like a mantra. He does not love. He does not bend. He does not need anyone. And worse, Damian Wolf had confirmed it himself. Years ago, when asked by a brazen reporter at a charity gala why he had never married, he answered with words that scorched across every headline in the city. I swore I'd never love. Love makes men foolish. I don't break. The declaration became legend. Boardrooms repeated it as caution. Women whispered it like a dare. None succeeded in melting his vow. Until tonight. Half hidden among the waitstaff was a woman who did not fit this glittering world at all. Clare Bennett balanced a tray of drinks higher than her head, moving between guests with the careful precision of someone used to being invisible. She didn't belong here, she knew it. She was filling in for a sick co-worker, her borrowed black dress 2 inches too short and shoes pinching her toes. But walking away wasn't an option. Her rent notice sat unpaid on her kitchen counter. She had promised herself she wouldn't glance at the powerful faces tonight, that she'd keep her head down and do the job. But then, her eyes caught him. Damian Wolf. He wasn't laughing with the others at his table. He wasn't flirting or mingling or draining his glass. He sat still, composed, his piercing gray eyes sweeping the room like an executioner choosing his target. Coldness radiated from him like frost curling on glass. Claire jerked her gaze away, her pulse shaking. Men like him weren't just unreachable, they were untouchable. But fate didn't care about vows or warnings tonight. It happened when she spun too quickly to avoid a fussy guest calling for champagne. A heel caught on the hem of her dress. The tray tilted. Glasses toppled. And one long pour of crimson wine landed squarely on Damian Wolf's immaculate white shirt. The ballroom gasped. Claire froze, horror flooding her veins. She clutched the tray as the crystal rolled loudly across the marble, heads swiveling toward her like vultures scenting weakness. Damian Wolf rose slowly from his chair. He didn't shout. He didn't flinch. He looked down at the blotch spreading across his chest as if it were another deal sliding across his desk, inevitable, solvable, unworthy of panic. His eyes lifted to her, sharp, like 2 shards of winter glass pinning her in place. Claire's voice tumbled, trembling. I'm so sorry. Her cheeks blazed. She dropped to her knees, fumbling for the napkins on his table to blot at the damage. This was it. She would be fired on the spot. She'd be lucky if she wasn't dragged out in humiliation. But his voice stopped her, low, precise, carrying through the murmurs. Stand up. She froze. The napkin shook in her fingers. His gray eyes sliced down at her, unreadable. Stand, he repeated. She rose on trembling legs. The room stilled, whispers stretching like threads. What would the Ice King do? Send her away? Crush her with a word? Damian Wolf reached calmly for his jacket, slipping it off with practiced movements. He shrugged it across his broad shoulders, covering the stain without a flicker of emotion. Then, to everyone's stunned silence, he said only one thing. It's a shirt. Replace the glasses. And he sat back down. The room gasped again, softer this time. Whispers fluttered like moths in the chandelier light. Claire hadn't been fired. She hadn't been humiliated. She had been spared. But spared wasn't the right word. Because when Damian's gaze lingered one beat longer on her, just before he turned away, something shifted in the air. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't anger. It was interest. And for Damian Wolf, the man who swore he'd never break, that tiny flame of interest was more dangerous than any empire he owned. Claire exhaled shakily, hurriedly collecting the scattered crystal. But her heart hammered because for one impossibly long second she knew, the man who swore he'd never love had just looked at her. Damian Wolf had not always been cold. There were old photographs of him rarely seen now, tucked in the corners of charity newsletters and dusty society magazines. A young man, smiling carelessly in sunlit gardens. His eyes softer, his lips freer. He had once believed in connection and loyalty and trust. That was before betrayal taught him a different gospel. He had been 26 when it happened. Already a rising titan in finance, heir apparent to the Wolf legacy, but still young enough to think the world was not all teeth. He had been engaged once, to Julia, the daughter of a shipping magnate. Elegant, cultured, adored by headlines. But that engagement did not end in a church of vows. It ended in the boardroom of Wolf International, where Damian discovered the merger his fiancée had arranged with his rival. It had been Julia herself who passed confidential data to undercut one of his early projects. She had smiled when she admitted it. Business is business, Damian. Surely you of all people understand. The scandal ripped the last softness from his chest. That night, Damian had stood before the press, jaw rigid, back like iron, declaring, "I swear I'll never love. Love makes men weak. I refuse to break." And the vow stuck. Newspapers mocked it at first, then printed it as prophecy when years stretched and no warmth or affection followed in his life. He dated no one seriously, married no one, never once appeared vulnerable in public again. Colleagues began to call him the Ice King. He turned the name into armor. Clare Bennett couldn't have been more different. While Damian's world gleamed with steel and glass towers, hers was lived in rented kitchens and second-hand furniture. Her father had been a plumber, her mother a caretaker. They had taught her survival, yes, but also taught her how to find joy in scraps, from songs whistled during work, to laughter stretched over simple dinners. When they passed within a year of each other, Claire had been left alone. She strung jobs together, waitressing, cleaning, volunteering at church events, filling every crack with effort. What she lacked in wealth, she carried in resilience. People remembered her smile, her kindness, even when her bills pressed harder with each month. She had been hesitant to take the catering assignment at Wolf's gala. Not just because the shoes pinched and the uniform felt borrowed, but because she knew exactly what men like Damian represented: cold walls of power. Men who never saw women like her as anything more than background service. She had heard of Damian Wolf's vow. Who hadn't? A man too proud to fall. It had become its own myth. Legends of a frozen king who could not be melted, no matter how many heiresses tried. And she despised myths like that, because they fed into every unfairness she had always seen in the world. The rich holding themselves like gods, untouchable, unfeeling, while people like her broke their backs unseen. So when wine spilled over him, ruining a shirt worth more than Claire's rent in a year, she had expected hellfire. Instead, she had been disarmed by something else. Not kindness exactly. Not warmth. But restraint. Patience. Interest. It rattled her more than rage ever could have. Damian, of course, had tried to dismiss the moment. Back in his penthouse the night after the gala, he stripped the ruined shirt from his body, tossing it into a bag for disposal. He poured himself scotch, standing before his sprawling city windows. It was nothing. It had to be nothing. Just a foolish girl with a tray. But his thoughts betrayed him. Her eyes had met his, wide with fear and shame, yet beneath the apology was fire. Not the flirtation or manipulation he was used to. Something honest. Something raw. He hated that it stuck in his mind. He hated that for the first time in years he had noticed anyone. His glass trembled in his hand, however imperceptibly. "Don't be weak," he muttered to his reflection. "Love breaks men. Don't forget." And yet, the memory of her lingered like a spark in his frozen veins. For Claire, the aftermath of the gala spiraled quickly. The catering manager scolded her harshly for clumsiness. "You're lucky Mr. Wolf has unusual patience. Any other host would have had you fired on the spot." She nodded quickly, swallowing humiliation. That job barely paid her rent and she couldn't risk losing it. But beyond the fear there was something stranger inside her: curiosity. Why hadn't he lashed out? Why had he treated the incident with the same detachment as a business meeting? She told herself it was simple arrogance. For men like Damian Wolf, nothing could touch them enough to spark emotion. Not even red wine staining silk. And yet, she still felt the weight of his gaze pressing on her long after she had left that golden ballroom. Their world should have separated forever after that night. His empire of ice and her life of survival. But fate has odd ways of binding opposites. 2 days later, Claire walked into her second job as a receptionist at a downtown development office, only to find that office had just been acquired. New brass plates bore the Wolf insignia. And Damian Wolf himself, in his ruthless expansion, now owned the company she depended on. Her spine stiffened when she saw him striding down that hallway in a stark gray suit. Their eyes locked for only a fraction of a second. A flicker of recognition sharpened his gaze. He said nothing. Neither did she. But something in his stare made her skin prickle, and something in his chest pinched. A reminder that warmth existed, though he swore it never would again. The morning Claire walked into the newly branded Wolf Development offices, she made a vow of her own: stay invisible. Do your job. Avoid him at all costs. She tucked her chin low, pushed her messy curls behind her ears, and kept her focus on the reception desk, memorizing tasks, sorting visitor logs, scheduling client meetings, and managing the endless phone calls of executives who lived 30 stories above her in status. It should have been simple. Until the day Damian Wolf arrived without warning. She heard it first, the silence. Conversations died, phones paused, heels halted against marble. The presence of power has a way of suffocating noise. When she looked up, he was walking through the lobby, gray suit pressed sharp, expression sharper, eyes colder and clearer than the glass walls that surrounded them. And then, his gaze landed squarely on her. Claire froze halfway through jotting notes. Her pen slipped. Recognition flared instantly. She saw it in the small flicker of his brow. The girl who had spilled wine on him at the gala. Their eyes held for one beat too long before he strode directly to her desk. "Name?" he demanded flatly. She blinked. "Clare. Clare Bennett." "Clare Bennett," he repeated as though testing the syllables. "You work here." She nodded quickly, throat dry. "Reception. Temporary hire, well until the acquisition." Silence stretched. The lobby staff tried not to breathe too loudly, pretending to shuffle papers. Finally, Damian spoke, voice calm and cruel as frost. "Don't spill anything here." Her cheeks blazed crimson. Laughter almost burst from the nearby staff before they choked it down, terrified of being noticed. Damian turned smoothly and vanished into the private elevator, leaving silence like shattered glass behind him. Claire wanted to sink under the desk. But fate offered her no escape. In the weeks that followed, Damian made frequent surprise appearances at the office. Sometimes for board meetings, sometimes to review projects. Each time, Claire was stationed reliably at her post, and each time, his gaze flickered toward her, sharp and unrelenting, as though daring her to falter again. She tried to ignore him, scribbling notes furiously, answering calls as if her life depended on not lifting her head. Yet irritation simmered in her chest. She refused to let him haunt her. One Friday afternoon, when he paused again before her desk, she couldn't stop her tongue. "I didn't spill anything today, Mr. Wolf." The words escaped sharper than she planned, echoing in the lobby. Heads jerked up. Damian's gray eyes drilled into hers. For a fraction of a second, something almost like amusement flickered in them. Almost. Then it was gone. "I don't reward bare minimums," he said coldly. "Do your job." He turned and strode away, leaving her fuming, her heart hammering far louder than necessary. Still, cracks began to form. One late evening she was the last in the office, head bent over call logs, struggling to reconcile numbers requested by management. The elevator chimed. Damian emerged, hair slightly tousled, tie loosened. He paused. "Why are you still here?" She jumped, startled. I had to finish these. They asked for the reports in the morning." He stepped closer, picking up one of the messy sheets. "These aren't your responsibility." "No one else was going to do them," she muttered, eyes narrowed. His brow arched faintly. "You stayed late for work unpaid." She lifted her chin. Better than letting things fall apart. For the first time he didn't cut her. He studied her, really studied, eyes scanning her tired but determined expression. The lobby light gleamed off her curls, her tired hands still scribbling. "That's not foolishness," he murmured at last. "That's loyalty." Claire blinked, stunned. By the time she gathered words, he had already returned the page and left as soundlessly as he came. Over time their clashes became pattern. Damian stopped by to deliver some cruel remark. She retorted with fire she hadn't thought herself brave enough to ignite. "You think intimidation wins everything," she spat once when he criticized her scheduling errors. "Some of us survive without gilded towers and piles of scotch, Mr. Wolf." Instead of snapping, he only tilted his head, curious at the burst of heat from a woman usually invisible to him. "Careful, Clare Bennett. Keep talking like that and they'll discover you steal my attention." Her heart slammed. Tension. His gaze lingered a beat longer before he turned back toward his office, leaving her trembling, furious, and oddly alive all at once. For Damian it was unbearable. Every wall he had built since Julia's betrayal bent tighter under her presence. She infuriated him. Her fire in the face of power, her ridiculous resilience, her warmth so constant it gnawed through his vow with every passing week. He told himself he didn't care. She was nothing. A receptionist, a mistake in heels, the clumsy girl from the gala. Yet at night, when he stood before his city windows, all he saw reflected was the flash of her wide eyes, the tremble in her voice lined with courage, the stubborn loyalty of a woman who stayed late unpaid to complete meaningless tasks just because no one else would. It knocked inside him, unfamiliar. And he hated it. For Claire too, confusion flooded. She despised his arrogance, the way he looked down on everyone as stretchable numbers in a balance sheet. But sometimes, just sometimes, she saw his armor slip. His patience when others would explode. His habit of checking work no one asked him to because he couldn't leave fractures unresolved. His quiet at night in the empty lobby, where his voice dipped lower, sounding not like a king of ice but a man carrying weight heavy enough to break anyone else. He was cold, yes. But coldness, she realized, wasn't absence. Coldness was protection. And though she swore she should hate him, warmth flickered dangerously in her chest when his gaze lingered too long. It had begun. The Ice King had noticed the woman who spilled wine on him. The Maid of Warmth was noticing the cracks in his frozen walls. And though neither dared name it yet, the heat spreading slowly between them was destined to melt empires. The announcement came on a Monday morning, slipped into Claire's inbox among the endless memos and client schedules. Effective immediately, Ms. Clare Bennett will serve as executive liaison to Mr. Wolf for Project Horizon. She read it 3 times before the meaning sank in. Liaison. To Damian Wolf. That wasn't a typo. Her stomach dropped. "No," she whispered aloud. "No, no, no." "Congratulations," muttered Anna from the desk beside her. The other receptionist raised her brows with pity. "I wouldn't wish that post on my worst enemy, Claire. You'll last a week." But Claire didn't get to protest. Hours later, Damian himself stepped into the lobby, gray eyes scanning until they narrowed on her desk. "Follow me," he instructed simply, as though this had been his decision all along. And just like that, she was in the storm. Project Horizon was one of Wolf International's most ambitious developments, a gleaming residential skyscraper at the edge of the financial district. Investors hovered like hawks, millions rested on impeccable execution. For Damian it was routine war. For Claire it was a foreign planet. Her first day as liaison saw her crammed into his private town car, laptop balanced on her knees, as Damian dictated contracts at bullet speed. His clipped words fired through the quiet interior. Clause 14, insert penalty language. Contact Terrence Carter noon tomorrow. Send adjusted timeline to, Ms. Bennett, are you writing or staring? Claire snapped her head down, typing frantically. I'm writing. You just talk like Siri on caffeine. For one wild heartbeat, his lips twitched, not into a smile, but into something that betrayed he'd heard humor he shouldn't acknowledge. Keep up, he muttered, but softer than before. Days blurred into relentless routines. Site visits, endless calls, frantic schedules. He worked like a machine, always sharp, always precise, his stride making everyone else rush to match it. Claire tried to despise him for it. For the way he barked orders over sleepless workers, for the deadlines that seemed humanly impossible. She tried, but then she noticed what others didn't. He never asked for overtime without staying himself. He drank bitter coffee at 2 a.m. while reviewing drafts line by line. He didn't sleep because he refused to let cracks break through. His coldness wasn't cruelty. It was obsession. A fortress carved from fear of failure. And for reasons she didn't understand, that realization softened something inside her chest. The turning point came on a Wednesday storm. They had toured the 37th floor of Horizon when thunder cracked across the sky, rattling scaffolding. Workers scrambled down, leaving the unfinished framework eerily silent. Damian pushed forward, unbothered. "Do you ever slow down?" Claire asked breathlessly, brushing soaked hair out of her face. His voice was calm, almost dry. "Storms don't pause, progress." But as lightning split the horizon, Claire grabbed his arm instinctively, panic shaking her. The steel under her palm jolted heat through her veins. "You're insane, this is dangerous." For once, Damian actually stopped. He looked down at her, rain soaking both their suits, their bodies only inches apart. Her grip loosened immediately, mortified. I'm sorry." But his eyes, usually cold, softened for the briefest moment. "You're not the first to call me insane," he said quietly. It startled a laugh out of her, even as thunder groaned above them. For the first time, their gazes lingered not with fire, but with something that felt almost human. Later that evening, back in his office, Claire sat at the long conference table typing notes as Damian reviewed contracts. Hours ticked. City lights gleamed through the glass wall like spilled diamonds. She finally sighed, rubbing her aching wrist. "You know, normal people eat dinner at night." Damian looked up, brows faint. "Normal people go bankrupt at night too." She rolled her eyes, exasperated, but then pushed a wrapped sandwich across the table. "At least eat something. Please." He hesitated. Damian Wolf did not take orders, least of all from a receptionist turned reluctant liaison. But her gaze held firm, stubborn fire glowing. Without quite understanding why, his hand reached and accepted. He unwrapped it slowly, taking a bite. Silence stretched. Claire arched a brow. "Well?" He swallowed. "Passable." "Passable?" she repeated, affronted. "That's my blood, sweat, and mustard in there, mister." His lips almost curved. "Almost. Mediocre mustard." She gaped, ready to retort, but froze when she saw it. The flicker at the corner of his mouth. "Not much. not enough to be called a smile. But more than his empire had probably seen in a decade. Her chest tightened. And suddenly she was terrified for another reason, because she wanted to see it again. At night, alone in her narrow apartment, Claire sat on her sagging couch replaying it all. The lightning, his softened eyes, the faintest twist of amusement over mustard. "I'm losing my mind," she whispered into the dark, hugging her knees. Because every warning told her to stay away. He was ruthless. He swore he'd never love. He was ice wearing a human suit. And yet, the more she saw, the more she believed. There was warmth buried under the frost. A warmth only she had somehow stumbled close enough to feel. Meanwhile, Damian brooded in his penthouse. He stood before the wall of windows again, scotch untouched in his hand. He hated how his thoughts tangled now. Meetings felt longer because he wondered what she might say about them. Silence pressed heavier because the echo of her laughter filled it. He dreaded mustard because the memory almost pulled a smile from him again. His vow rang in his head like a hammer. Never love. Never break. But Clare Bennett had already melted the edges. And for the first time in nearly a decade, Damian Wolf feared not rivals or deals, but himself. The rumor started small, whispered comments in the break room, smirks when Claire passed carrying Damian's files. It didn't matter that she was technically a liaison, a title shoved onto her by corporate necessity. Staff didn't care about contracts. They noticed the way she walked out of meetings late at night alongside Wolf himself. They noticed she sat in his car on site visits, scribbling notes at his command. They noticed his gaze, sharp on everyone else, lingered just a fraction longer when it landed on her. By the end of the week it wasn't whispers anymore. Articles popped online. The Ice King's assistant. New flame or new fool? Who is Clare Bennett, Wolf's receptionist turned shadow? Claire wanted to disappear into the floor. One evening after the third headline, Claire slammed her laptop shut and buried her face in her hands. She couldn't endure another comment from Anna at reception muttering, "Sleep with the boss perks." She couldn't handle the stares at the site, workers gossiping about how she wasn't qualified to breathe the same air as Wolf. She stormed toward Damian's office, her heart full of fire and panic, rehearsing words like weapons. But when she pushed the door open, he was there, standing alone by his desk, tie loose, jaw tense. He looked up, gray eyes locking instantly on hers. "Claire," he said, voice low. She didn't wait. "This has to stop," she burst. "They're talking about me. About us. Everyone thinks. Her voice shook, her cheeks burning. "They think I'm only here because of..." The words tangled, too humiliating to finish. Damian's expression changed, sharpening. He straightened slowly, his presence filling the space. "Because of me," he finished quietly. Her throat ached. "Yes." He stepped closer. "And does that unsettle you?" "Yes," she shouted. Then softer, trembling, she whispered, "Every day it feels like they're right. I'm not strong enough to stand in your shadow, Damian. I don't belong in your world." Silence thundered. Then his voice, lower, bled out calm steel. "You stood in the storm on Horizon's 37th floor while lightning struck. Not even my investors would have stayed there. Don't you dare tell me you're not strong enough." Her breath caught. His eyes weren't cold this time. They burned with conviction, with something dangerous, something that made her knees weaken. And then, fleeting but undeniable, his hand lifted. He brushed a damp curl from her cheek, fingers grazing her skin with startling gentleness. The contact sent shivers plunging down her spine. Her lips parted. "Damian?" But just as quickly as his warmth touched her, it vanished. His hand retreated, jaw tightening, eyes freezing shut again. "No," he muttered under his breath. "This cannot happen." Her heart cracked, confusion and hurt swirling. "Why not?" He turned sharply, retreating behind his desk. "Because I swore I would never love." Her chest hollowed. She stared, speechless, at the man who had just defended her with fire only to retreat behind ice again. "Then you've built a prison for yourself," she whispered hoarsely. "And I'm not sure I can survive inside it." She fled before he could speak. The next day, Claire tried to bury herself in silence again, but society didn't make it easy. That evening at a charity event, whispers swelled louder. A woman in diamonds leaned toward Claire with a cruel smile. "You're brave, dear, parading as Mr. Wolf's pet project. Did he choose you because you spill wine well?" Snickers exploded from the circle around her. Claire's cheeks burned red, shame and fury colliding until her lungs felt raw. She wanted to respond, to stand tall, but words fractured under their venom. Until Damian's voice cut through. "Enough." The group turned. Damian stood behind her, tall, unyielding. His gaze was a blade, his tone ice-sharp. "If you have time for childish gossip, you clearly don't belong at my table," he said evenly. "Clare Bennett is more woman than any of you pretending at pearls." The silence was electric. Diamonds flashed in gaping mouths. Damian's arm pressed gently at Claire's back, shielding her, guiding her away. Her chest pounded as cameras flashed, capturing the tense moment. They slipped into his car minutes later. Claire's breathing shattered, her tears threatening. She turned to face him, voice fierce, trembling. "What? Why would you defend me like that if you feel nothing?" Damian's jaw clenched, his knuckles pale where his hands gripped the wheel. Finally his voice cracked through the hush. "Because I do feel. And it terrifies me." Her breath hitched. He turned then, gray eyes raw with something she'd never seen in them before. Not arrogance, not cold control, but fear. Fear of surrender. Fear of her. "I swore I'd never love Claire. I swore. Because love ruined me once. It made me weak. It left nothing but betrayal." His throat tightened. "But when you look at me, when you laugh, when you stand in storms, when you glare fire into my ice, I break. And I promised I never would again." Her tears slid freely now, shimmering in the low car light. She whispered, shattering, "Maybe breaking is exactly what you need." The silence stretched, thick with everything unsaid. Until Damian's hand, shaking faintly, lifted hers from her lap. His fingers closed around hers. And for the first time in almost 10 years, Damian Wolf allowed another person's warmth into his palm. The night after Damian's defense at the charity event, the tabloids erupted. The photographs splattered across glossy pages. Damian Wolf, the Ice King, standing protectively behind an ordinary receptionist, his hand braced at her back as though shielding her from the entire world. The quotes were everywhere. "Clare Bennett is more woman than any of you pretending at pearls." Pundits debated whether it was chivalry or scandal. Headlines screamed, "Has the Ice King finally cracked? Who is Clare Bennett? The woman who dared to thaw Wolf." And with that, Claire's world tilted into chaos. At the office, whispers sharpened into knives. When she stepped into the elevator, 2 assistants sneered openly. "She's not even pretty enough for him. Must be desperate. Everyone knows he'll drop her once the gossip served its purpose." Claire's chest burned crimson, but the worst part wasn't their words. It was the way her heart twisted, not because she believed them but because she feared Damian did. That evening, Damian summoned her to his office. She braced herself to hear him admit regret, to hear the words, "This was a mistake." Instead, she found him pacing before the floor-to-ceiling windows, his tie loosened, his jaw tight. When he turned, his voice was sharp. "Do you see the storm you've caused?" Her throat tightened. "I caused? Damian, I didn't ask you to defend me. I didn't ask to be the center of headlines." His eyes glinted, steel clashing against her fire. "You didn't have to ask. Every time you walk into a room, every time you raise that stubborn chin at me, you invite attention." Her cheeks flamed hot. "So now existing is a crime?" "No," he snapped. Then softer, betraying cracks in his control, "Existing breaks me." The words silenced her, trembling against the cold marble of his vow. But then just as quickly his walls slammed closed again. "This ends now. You stay in my orbit strictly for business." Nothing more. Nothing less. Her chest hollowed, breaking wider than gossip ever could. "So what am I to you, Damian?" she whispered, voice trembling. "A liability? A mistake you regret letting near?" His lips pressed thin. He didn't answer, and his silence cut deeper than words could. Claire left the office that night with tears spilling down her cheeks. The weight of whispers, the endless humiliation, the cold emptiness of his denial, it all pressed until she broke into sobs at a bus stop beneath blinking streetlights. She thought of her father's calloused hands, her mother's warm laughter, all the strength that had raised her to believe dignity mattered more than money. And here she was, letting herself crumble because a billionaire who swore he'd never love had nearly made her believe she was the exception. Fool, she thought bitterly. You let yourself believe you were different. Meanwhile, Damian stood alone in his glass penthouse, unable to breathe beneath the weight of the vow that had once felt like victory but now felt like a curse. Never love. Never break. It was a fortress. It had kept him safe after Julia's betrayal, after years of knives disguised as affection. But Clare Bennett had slipped through every crack. She had looked at him not as a titan, not as a god, but as a man. And for that, he felt everything. Too much. He poured scotch, but it burned like gasoline in his chest. His hands trembled on the glass. He thought of her fire, her smile even when exhausted, her courage standing among wolves disguised as women in diamonds. He swore aloud to his reflection, "You do not love her." But when he closed his eyes, it was her laughter that warmed the silence anyway. Days passed heavy with tension. Claire avoided his gaze, keeping her tasks clipped and professional. She stopped bantering, stopped glaring, stopped acting like herself. She built her own walls, and Damian, cold and silent, let her. At a high-profile investor dinner later that week, Claire lingered at the edge of the ballroom, forced to attend as part of her liaison duties. She tried to blend into the shadows. But Cassandra Price, Damian's old nemesis and society's cruel queen, spotted her instantly. Cassandra's gleaming smile cut like a knife as she swept Claire into the center of a circle of jeweled women. My, Cassandra purred. The Ice King's attendant. Snickers rippled. "Tell us, Claire," Cassandra said louder. "Does Mr. Wolf keep you for your schedule management, or services more personal?" The laughter went sharp as glass. Claire's throat shook, the crowd closing in, whispers hissing louder, "Gold digger, liar, pretend." Her vision blurred. For a moment she thought she might faint from the humiliation. Then the hall went silent. Because Damian Wolf himself had arrived. His gaze burned across the circle, slicing through Cassandra until her painted smile wilted. When his eyes found Claire, wide, shattered, trembling, they faltered for just a fraction, something raw breaking in them. He stepped forward, his voice sharp as broken steel. "Enough." But this time Claire didn't wait for him to shield her. With shaking breath, she straightened her back, her voice trembling but clear. "I belong here as much as anyone," she said to Cassandra, her chin rising. "More maybe because I show up out of loyalty, not greed." The room froze. Cassandra's face drained pale. Claire's voice steadied stronger. "Mock me all you like. It doesn't erase the fact that I stood in storms your diamonds couldn't withstand." The gasps rose like waves. Damian's eyes flickered with astonishment, and something else, something almost reverent. His hand closed around hers, steadying her trembling fingers in his palm. "She's right," he said, voice low but booming through the hush. "And if any of you doubt it, you doubt me." Cassandra flinched, retreating with brittle laughter, the circle dispersing in awkward silence. For Claire, pride and heartbreak tangled so hard she could barely breathe. Because even while Damian defended her, even while his hand gripped hers, it was still only defense. Not confession. Not love. By the end of the night, when she lay in bed staring at dark ceilings, her tears fell quietly. Adrian Wolf had built his vow into a fortress, but she was trapped standing outside its frozen walls, knocking until her knuckles bled. And she wondered, was melting his heart even possible? The silence between them stretched for days. At the office, Claire kept her head down, her task sufficient, her voice clipped. She went to meetings, answered calls, took notes, and avoided Damian's gaze so completely that the absence of her fire seemed louder than any confrontation. For Damian it was unbearable. He told himself he wanted her quiet, her withdrawal, her distance. Distance meant control. Control meant safety. But the longer she withdrew, the more restless he became. The coffee tasted bitterer. Meetings dragged. Nights in the penthouse echoed with hollowness. His vow rang like a chain: never love, never break. But every echo of silence from Claire told him he was already breaking, and not in the way he once feared. The turning point came late one evening when he returned from a grueling negotiation. He stepped into the office suite and stopped dead. Her desk was empty. Not cleared for the night. Cleared permanently. The framed photo of her parents she kept beside the pen jar, gone. The chipped blue mug she favored, gone. The stack of post-it scribbled in her neat but crooked script, gone. Damian's chest tightened, a jagged weight plunging inside him. He pressed the intercom. "Where is Bennett?" The assistant stammered. "Sir, she resigned this afternoon. Packed and left. Said she wouldn't be returning." The words sliced deeper than any blade. For a long moment, Damian couldn't breathe. Claire sat in her tiny apartment, a suitcase half-packed on her bed. Her letter of resignation had been simple. "Thank you for the opportunity. I can no longer meet the demands of this position." She had cried writing it, though she didn't admit it to herself. Because it wasn't the job she couldn't survive. It was him. She loved him. She'd known for weeks now, even as she begged herself not to. But loving a man who swore never to love meant slowly erasing herself. And she couldn't keep cutting pieces of herself away just to stand near him. Better to leave, to guard the last fragments of her pride. Yet her chest cracked with grief. Because though she was walking away, her heart refused to follow. That night, Claire startled from her thoughts at a sharp knock on her door. She frowned, confused, until the knock repeated harder. When she opened it, her heart plummeted. Damian Wolf stood there. Rain dampened his suit, his hair tousled, his gray eyes darker, heavier than she'd ever seen. He filled the doorway with his presence, but gone was the armor of the Ice King. He looked raw, untethered. "You resigned?" he said flatly. Claire stiffened, shielding her heart with crossed arms. "I did. And I don't owe you an explanation." "You don't." His voice faltered just slightly. "But I need one." Her eyes burned. "You don't get to demand answers. Not after weeks of silences. Not after weeks of making me feel like I was just noise for you to swat at." Damian's jaw clenched. He stepped inside, his presence overwhelming the tiny space. "You were never noise, Claire." Tears threatened. "Then what was I? A pet project? An obligation to defend when the cameras watched? Because if I mattered to you as much as you pretended that night at Cassandra's, why can't you just—" Her voice broke, trembling against the truth. "Why can't you just say it?" For a long beat, Damian was silent. His whole body trembled with restraint. Finally his voice cracked. "Because I swore I never would." Her lips parted, fury sparking. "Then your vow means more to you than I ever could." The word shattered him. He saw it in her eyes, resolve steeling against grief. She was gone. She would walk out of his world, not just his office. Leave his empire colder than before. And in that moment, Damian Wolf understood the truth. His vow hadn't saved him. It had killed him piece by piece. Until she had come. Until Claire. Before she could pick up her suitcase, he moved. His hand closed gently, desperately, over hers. His eyes burned into hers, no longer cold, no longer controlled, bare, human, breaking. "Claire," he rasped, his voice unrecognizable. "I don't know how to unlearn everything I've taught myself. But losing you is worse than every betrayal I've ever endured." Her throat tightened. "Then stop choosing your vow over me." Silence swelled. Rain drummed against her window. Damian's chest heaved as though he were battling himself, his vow, his past, all at once. And then finally, his voice broke open. "I swore I'd never love. But I already do." The tears that flooded her eyes mirrored the storm outside. Her body trembled as his hand cupped her cheek at last, reverent, terrified, undone. "You melted everything, Claire," he whispered hoarsely. "Everything I swore was ice. You melted it until I can't breathe without you." She crumbled into him then, sobs breaking free against the fortress of his chest. He held her tighter than anyone he ever had, breaking his vow and remaking himself in the same breath. And for the first time in years, Damian Wolf allowed himself to melt. The morning after Damian's confession, Claire awoke with her head pressed against his chest. His arm was still around her, heavy with exhaustion, his breath rough and uneven even in sleep. For a fleeting moment, she let herself smile through swollen eyes. She had thought him untouchable, incapable, and yet he had shattered his vow in her apartment under rainfall, but doubt crept in as it always did. Words can slip free in weakness. What if he regretted them in the morning? What if the Ice King of Wall Street woke up, and all that remained was marble again? When Damian stirred, gray eyes opening, panic seized her. She pushed herself upright quickly, creating space, bracing for the mask. But his gaze didn't go cold. His hand reached slowly, almost cautiously, toward her cheek, as if asking permission to brush a tear stain still lingering there. "You're still here?" he said softly. For Damian Wolf, a man who had built his identity on solitude, the words were quieter than a vow but heavier than steel. "I don't know if I can trust you," Claire whispered. Her voice shook with truth. "You've spent years proving you can't love. And now, one sentence, one night, and I'm meant to believe." Damian's hand fell, his jaw flexing. "Then let me prove it." His proving began in small steps. At the office, Claire noticed it first in how he spoke her name. Not clipped, not sharp, but deliberate. He didn't bark orders at her anymore. He asked softly with respect that startled both her and the staff. When gossip sparked again among the receptionists, Damian shut it down with 2 sentences in an open meeting. "Clare Bennett's work built this project. Without her, horizon collapses. Anyone who disagrees can leave my company." Silence fell like a gavel. No one whispered again. And then there were the moments only she saw. How he lingered when she laughed, gaze softening without his permission. How his hand brushed her lower back protectively when cameras snapped. How he tucked his jacket around her shoulders on cold sight nights, as though fighting a war against the world's chill for her sake alone. Each moment pulled at the bricks in her walls. But trust, once broken by silence, resisted rebuilding. She wanted to believe. She ached to. But betrayal and humiliation sting sharper than confession heals. The public test came sooner than either expected. At Wolf International's quarterly gala, every investor, every rival, every journalist crouched, waiting to pounce. Damian was expected to stand alone again, as always, untouchable. Instead, when the doors swept wide and Damian entered, Claire walked on his arm. The whispers struck instantly, vicious and loud. "An assistant? Here? He's lost his mind. Wolf with a commoner? Watch. This ends in flames by midnight." Claire's chest tightened under the stares. She wanted to retreat, to shrink into what she had always been, invisible. But Damian's hand covered hers firmly, a steady anchor at the crook of his arm. He leaned down just enough, his voice for her ears only. "Don't look at them. Look at me." So she did. And the world dimmed around the burn of his gaze. Halfway through the gala, Cassandra Price returned. She had been quiet for months, But tonight she radiated with fresh venom, circling the crowd until her smile landed on Claire. "Well," Cassandra drawled loudly, "the Ice King's gone soft. Tamed by a woman who files reports. Tell me, darling," her gaze seared Claire, "have you worked out payment terms yet? His empire in exchange for your little warmth?" The laughter ripped cruel, vicious as ever. Claire's chest flamed with shame, fury, grief. She almost stepped back. But Damian's hand tightened, pulling her forward instead. His gray eyes swept the room, his jaw set like stone, his voice booming with force. "Payment terms?" he said flatly. "Here's the truth. Every deal I signed, every tower I built, every fortune I multiplied, none of it compares to what she gives me for free." Clare Bennett melted what I vowed could never thaw. "You want to talk bargains? You're looking at the only one I've ever made gladly. And it wasn't with a contract. It was with my heart." Gasps erupted across the hall. The investors gaped, journalists scribbled furiously. Cassandra's face drained bloodless before twisting with brittle laughter. "So it's true. You are broken." Damian's arm wrapped firmly, protectively, around Claire in front of them all. "Yes," he said, his voice sharper than a knife, but burning with something warmer than flames. "And it's the strongest I've ever been." The hall stilled, stunned into silence. For the first time Damian Wolf had admitted what no vow, no empire, no ice could contain. He loved her. Claire trembled at his words, even after the gala shifted, after Cassandra vanished in humiliation, after the whispers turned into stunned murmurs of respect. She sat with him in the car, breathless. "Do you understand what you've done?" she whispered. "You've told them. Publicly. Risked everything." Damian turned to her, gray eyes burning with unrelenting truth. "I've risked everything before, on deals, on towers, on people who betrayed me. And none of it mattered. You matter. You're the only thing I will never regret risking." Her throat burned with tears. This wasn't a vow of paper or necessity. It was a vow of choice. Her heart whispered, maybe he is real. 4 days after the gala, Claire's world felt surreal. She walked into the office expecting whispers, but instead there was silence, an almost reverent muteness that came whenever she passed desks. People didn't sneer anymore. Some nodded politely, others looked at her with disbelief. The tabloids hadn't stopped talking, but the tone was different now. Damian Wolf melts, love over empire. The Ice King's public confession stuns investors. Who is Clare Bennett, the woman who broke the billionaire's vow? Her chest churned with too many feelings. Relief, pride, fear. This was more attention than she'd ever wanted, but it wasn't just that. Deep down, her heart whispered the most dangerous thought of all. He meant it. But a whisper wasn't proof. She had seen how vows could break. That evening, Damian called her to his office. She braced herself as always, smoothing her skirt, clutching her notebook, pretending her hands weren't trembling. When she stepped in, he wasn't behind his desk. He was by the window again, city glowing beneath him in rivers of light. Normally his posture was rigid, commanding. Tonight, it was different. His shoulders dropped, his head slightly bowed. "Close the door," he said quietly. She obeyed, nerves sparking. "Damian?" He turned. And for the first time the armor was gone, stripped clean. His face looked raw human. "I've given you empires, Claire," he said slowly. "I've defended you in rooms where names and money burn reputations like tinder. But I don't think I've given you the one thing you've asked for from the beginning." Her breath tightened. "What's that?" His voice cracked. "Honesty." The words sank between them like thunder. Damian took a step closer, his gray eyes unflinching. "I swore I'd never love because I thought strength was silence. Because when Julia betrayed me, the boy I was died. I decided love was a weapon, one I would never hand anyone again." His jaw clenched, but the pain bled through. "And then you spilled wine in my lap and looked at me without fear of what I owned, and all at once I wasn't just a fortress anymore. I was a man again. And that terrified me." Her eyes blurred with tears. He moved closer, each word trembling with truth. "So yes, I swore. But I broke that vow the moment you smiled at me, the moment you defied me, the moment you defended yourself when no one else would." Every day you've been melting me, Clare. I could fight investors, rivals, empires, but I couldn't fight you. Not once. Tears slid down Claire's cheeks. He stopped just before her, voice raw. I don't want you to wonder if my words were weakness or show. I need you to know beyond doubt, I love you. And I will love you until every tower falls. The silence that followed was deafening. The Ice King had said it, no shield, no cage. Claire's knees trembled. For months she had ached for this, dreamed of it, feared it. And here it was, placed into her open hands, fragile, unguarded, everything he'd vowed she would never see. Her voice came in a whisper. Damian, I've loved you longer than I've admitted to myself, but I was afraid. Afraid you'd never let me in, that I was just something temporary, something beneath you. He lifted a shaking hand, cupping her cheek reverently. Look at me, Clare. Beneath me? You're the only one who ever stood beside me. Her sob broke against the edges of his palm. And then her lips found his, answering not with fear but with fire. The kiss was unlike anything before, not restrained duty like at Horizon, not hesitant brushes and fleeting moments. It was desperate, consuming, dizzying. His ice melted completely into heat against her, pulling her close, her fingers clutching the lapels of his suit as though holding a lifeline. She laughed softly against his lips, her tears wet between them. Damian Wolf, the Ice King. Broken. His forehead fell to hers, his breath ragged. No. Found. The following week, the world rumbled with the shockwaves. Investors predicted scandal, but instead, profits rose. Customers saw humanity in their empire for the first time. His board tried to whisper warnings. Damian silenced them with one line. If Clare Bennett is a liability, then so is every ounce of integrity. And I don't run empires with lies. Clare watched him from the side of the boardroom, chest swelling, heart thawing completely. She finally believed. Because love wasn't making him weaker. It was making him unstoppable. That night, at her apartment balcony, the very one where he had once confessed, I swore I'd never love, Clare leaned against Damian beneath the stars. His arm wrapped her fully, pulling her closer as though she had been his missing piece all along. You've ruined my reputation, you know, he murmured. She tilted up, smirking playfully through tears. You never cared about reputation. No, he admitted. His gaze held hers, his voice softer than silk. But I care about you. And when his lips pressed to hers again, steady and sure, Clare knew without doubt. The vow was over. The cold was gone. What was left was fire. The world tried to spin its stories, of course. 4 weeks after the gala and Damian's open confession, headlines blazed. Ice King melts. Billionaire brought to his knees by love. Clare Bennett, Queen of Fire. But what shocked them wasn't that Damian Wolf had broken his vow. It was what happened afterward. Instead of his reputation crumbling, his empire surged. Investors who once mocked him now respected him more. Clients praised that behind the glass towers was a man who could still bleed and still protect. For the first time in years, humanity returned to Wolf International's name. And Damian did not retreat into silence again. He walked into boardrooms with Clare at his side, handshake firm, gaze proud, his voice unapologetic. This is the woman who taught me strength isn't coldness, he declared once at an industry keynote. This is Clare Bennett. And with her, I am more than I ever was alone. The applause roared, cameras flashed, and somewhere in the crowd Cassandra Price's face twisted red before retreating into whispered obscurity. Her empire of scorn crumbled the moment Damian proved hers was irrelevant. For Clare, the world still shimmered like a strange dream. She remembered the first day at his desk, fumbling papers under his wintry gaze. She remembered the wine spill, the humiliation, the vow he had barked for years. Now those memories felt like shadows in a distant life. One night, weeks later, as they walked back through the half-completed floors of Horizon, the glass and steel tower that had borne so much of their storm, she stopped, gazing at the city stretched wide below them. You know, she said softly, if someone told me a year ago I'd be standing here beside Damian Wolf of all people, hearing him say the word love, I would have laughed until I cried. Damian's expression softened. something she could still hardly believe belonged to him now. He slipped his arm fully around her, resting his hand against her waist. "And if anyone told me," he murmured, "that after Julia, after what I vowed, I'd stand on a half-finished tower with a receptionist holding my heart, I would have destroyed the thought before it formed." She leaned into him. "So what changed?" He tilted her chin with startling gentleness. You were the one thing I couldn't calculate, couldn't buy, couldn't control. You didn't wait for me to let you in. You melted straight through, until the vow didn't matter anymore." He swallowed, his voice dipping hoarse. "You are my vow now, Claire. Every day. Every night. Always." Her throat closed, tears shimmering. She had stood through storms of humiliation and cold denial, convinced she would never hear this freely. And now she didn't just hear it. She believed it. The press labeled them, the ice and the flame. And though Damian hated the dramatics, Claire teased him relentlessly. "I think it's fitting," she joked one evening as they prepared for another event. "You really were frozen. Stubborn as a glacier. And me? I chipped away." He shot her a smirk, the expression still rare, still dangerous on his lips. "You didn't chip. You burned. And I let you." Her laughter filled their penthouse, warm enough to replace even the quiet rain on the windows. Their final stand before the world came at the Horizon inauguration itself, a year to the day since Claire had spilled wine on Damian's lap. A ballroom glowed atop the new tower, executives, leaders and cameras packed shoulder to shoulder. Claire stood in a pale gown at Damian's side, her heart pounding as microphones rose. She braced herself for whispers, for doubts that never truly died. But Damian's hand slipped into hers as he stepped to the podium. He addressed the crowd, voice steady. "You all know me as Wolf. As Steel. As the man who swore I would never love." Silence rippled. Whispers fluttered that he paused, then turned, letting cameras capture his gray eyes burning not at the crowd, but at the woman beside him. "And yet, you also know stories change. Because one woman walked into my empire without asking permission. She faced storms in her own right and she refused to turn cold just because the world demanded it. She melted ice that I swore would never break, and proved that strength isn't solitude. It's letting yourself be changed." Gasp. Camera flashes. Claire's chest surged with too many emotions to contain. Damian took her hand higher, his voice lowering into words meant for her but carried for all to hear. "So yes, I loved nothing once. But now, Claire is everything." The ballroom roared with applause. And though not every whisper silenced, none of them mattered. Because standing there, hand in hand, Claire and Damian weren't explaining themselves anymore. They were living truth. Later that night, as the ballroom lights fell dark and the skyline glittered outside Horizon's glass walls, Claire slipped into Damian's arms, her cheek pressed against his chest. "You stood in front of the entire city," she whispered, awe in her voice. "The man who swore he'd never love." He tucked her tighter, lips brushing her hair. "And I never will again," he murmured. "Because my heart belongs to you alone, and you've already melted it perfectly." Her smile glowed through her tears. "Good. Because I never planned on letting it freeze again." They laughed, kissed, and held each other as their tower loomed above the city, not steel, not glass, but fire and warmth strong enough to alter legends. The Ice King no longer reigned. The man in love did.